Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you. I'm Joy Carter, I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the whole university community to welcome you here this evening. So what are inaugural professorial lectures? Well, it's actually a chance to celebrate the outstanding work and research of our academics. And of course, this evening, we're delighted to welcome Marcus, Professor of Digital Media Education, and a hugely valued member of staff at the university here for nearly 10 years. So I'm going to tell you a bit about Marcus. So Marcus grew up in southwest London with his two brothers. He was the first in his family to go to university. He's a courageous and enterprising individual, and he overcame a variety of obstacles to get a place on a degree course. He started initially at Kingston, moved to the University of the West of England, and there he graduated with a BA in Politics and Sociology. Marcus continued his studies with a Master's in Social Analysis from Southbank University. Marcus has an adventurous spirit. More of that in a moment. But first let me tell you, it took him to Bangkok, where he taught English in a private university for 2 years. This was the first of many international endeavours throughout Marcus's career. Marcus came back to the UK and embarked on a PhD, looking at the use of the internet in Croatia after the breakup of Yugoslavia. A rather unlikely topic, but a very interesting one. It was unlikely, but it was also pioneering, and particularly giving the importance of digital and social media that we're so used to in geopolitics today. Marcus's first academic role was in a different country, not too far away in Wales, at Trinity College Carmarthen, now known as the University of Wales Trinity St David. And from Wales, Marcus came here in 2009 to lead on the development of our Media Studies degree. In 2012, he was made head of the School of Media and Film, and he stood down from this in 2016 to undertake and focus on his research. Marcus took his sabbatical in Ireland. What a lovely place to go, as a visiting scholar at the University of Limerick. He wrote his latest book, Media and Information Literacy, an Integrated Approach for the 21st Century. And he took his family, who are all here this evening, to spend time as well in his wife Siv's homeland. What a lovely family you have, Marcus, and it's wonderful to welcome you all here tonight. So Marcus has travelled extensively with his reputation in media education preceding him. He was visiting research fellow at the University of Hokkaido in Japan, visiting fellow at the University of Limerick, visiting professor at the University of, wait for it, Costa Rica, and has links around the globe from Jamaica to Hong Kong. Marcus is a prolific writer. He's the author or editor of 7 books, over 40 articles and book chapters, and he's given more than 80 presentations at scholarly events in over 30 countries. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a Senior Fellow of Advanced Higher Education. In 2008, he was made a National Teaching Fellow, and this was partly for his work in supporting students with dyslexia and dyspraxia. That's a fantastic area to be in, and it's also an area that we're really passionate about here at the university. Marcus, it's an endless delight to have you as part of the University of Winchester family, and it's especially lovely to welcome you up here tonight to give your inaugural professorial lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Marcus a big welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming here tonight. Friends, family, colleagues, students, or they're all friends to me, really. Listening to Joy there, I do feel a little bit of an imposter to be here. So it gives me a good opportunity to test that out. And hopefully by the end, you'll be able to tell me if I am actually an imposter as a university professor or not. So tonight, I want to talk about the digital divide. Before I start, however, what I want to do is ask you 4.5 questions. So in a bit of audience participation. So first off, I want anybody in this room who does not have a mobile phone with them at the moment to put their hand up. Oh, we've got quite a few. We've got the Vice-Chancellor, Head of Learning and Teaching, all my students, and my children. And a couple of people there. Thank you, that's a very interesting number. That's quite a high proportion, actually. Secondly, I want you to think back. For many of you, this won't be true, but let's see how many of us. Can you remember a time before the internet? How many of us can actually do that? Oh, yeah. Oh, Josh? How old are you, Josh? Oh, okay. And can you remember how we searched for information? How we tried to find things out before we had the ready access of Google? The laborious tasks that we had to go through for doing that. So I wanted to keep that thought in mind as we go on a bit. Do you remember communicating with people before social media? Trying to arrange events, trying to facilitate meetups? How did we do it? A few people, can you remember how we did it? Was a phone involved? Letters? Here's interesting. Do you make and upload content? So I'd like to ask, how many of you upload things? Oh, a phenomenal amount there. That is very high for the number. So we'll come back to all these questions as we proceed through the lecture. And the final one, do you ever regret the invention of the internet and of social media? Do you ever lament its place in our lives? Has it ever made things worse? Would anyone say yes to that? Yeah. Oh, quite a few. Let's have some answers. Shelley, why?
Yes, social media because of the way that it, well, many reasons, but most immediately because of the ways it's affected recent elections in
Oh,
the US and the UK.
okay, very interesting. Josh, what did you say?
I would say yes because of the fake identity behind the screen.
Okay, so you kind of lack a trust in it, really, a bit. What's another gentleman over here? Who else? Annabelle.
The effect it's had on the mental health of young people.
Okay, good. Any others?
I just think it's a big disaster. You never hear a news item where you hear somebody say, so-and-so tweeted last night and they're really delighted that they made it.
Unless Mr. Trump is tweeting, and then it's the best video. Okay, thank you. We're going to look at those as we go through, and I want you to try and keep them. Oh, there's another one. Oh, Tara, why do you think? Fortnite. Oh, why do you say that?
Because everyone's talking about it, it's really boring.
Okay. Good, because it kind of sucks in all the conversation from what we're having with other people, doesn't it? Okay, let's move on a bit. Right, so what I want to do today is talk about the digital divide. Now, the digital divide crudely refers to a gulf between those who have ready access to the internet, those who've got it, and those who don't. There's a gap. Some people have got the internet, some people haven't. The gap in the middle is what we term the digital divide. Now, my career is about as old as our awareness of this digital divide. I first started teaching in, 1995? And that was when the internet when the web first really started to get a mass audience. So my career kind of intersects with that. And the reason I chose this topic today is because at various points in my career, I've tried to look at issues related to the digital divide. And I had a number of options for doing today's lecture. I could have sat here and told you all about my wonderful career and the amazing things I've done. But I thought rather than that, I'd do something interesting for you and try and talk about a topic. My research plugs into this topic at various points. So tonight, I want to examine the divide and look at 3 key ways or dimensions in which the digital divide operates. So firstly, I want to look at the idea of access. Who does and does not have physical access to the internet? How is that distributed? Who's got it and who hasn't? And then I'd like to move on to education. What do we need to know to access the internet? Is it when film first started, we had to learn how to watch film. And there's technical barriers to understanding how to use the internet. But is that all we need to know about the internet? Do we need more critical skills in our engagement with the internet? And finally, I want to look at the topic of participation. Who is making the content that we consume? A lot of you just put your hands up. So actually, for this audience, we're producing a lot of it ourselves. But there's vast swathes of the world that aren't making it. And I want to ask, does that make any difference? So we're going to look at academic research on the topic, including some of my own, but I'll try and hide it quite well so you won't know it's me, and try to determine if the digital divide is still a problem for us. So I need to take you back a little bit and give you some history. Internet technologies emerged in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and they initially came from the US Department of Defense. They were initially developed as a way in which the US could have a communication system that could survive a nuclear attack. And they worked in partnership with universities and developed a very clever system by which there wasn't a single central point of failure. Instead, the internet is distributed, so you can't knock it out with one system. So it was first developed in the late 60s, early 70s. The first email was sent in 1971, but it wasn't called an email. We didn't have that way of thinking about it. The first email called an email was sent in 1977 when they developed specific software for it. The web was invented by this gentleman here, Tim Berners-Lee, who was a British scientist working at CERN on a predecessor to the Large Hadron Collider. And Tim Berners-Lee developed a number of software packages that allow academics and people to communicate information, scholarly ways, across a network of computers. And that was the web. It was first developed in 1989, but really became popular in the mid-1990s when you started getting CDs stuck on the front covers of magazines, and they would allow you to plug them into a modem and dial up to the internet. And it really kicked off in about 1995, which is when I started engaging with it. There's no coincidence in that. Now, there's been enormous recognition that access to the internet can have big benefits for both an individual and for society as a whole. So the internet was thought to have lots of different benefits. So I'm going to highlight just 5 here. First off is economic. So we think that the internet has a positive impact on the gross domestic product of a country. The more internet and more digital media you have in a society, the more advantages you can take of that media to leverage and improve the gross domestic product. And so there's lots of reports. So this is the United States International Trade Council, which is a government body in the US, and they were showing a 26% improvement when you had the internet compared to when you didn't have the improvement. This relates to the savings you can make when you can send things electronically rather than through post and other things. There's also political advantages to disseminating the internet. A lot has been made of the democratic potential of the internet. And if you cast your minds back to 2010 and 2011, the Arab Spring was understood to be underpinned by a lot of social media. And so the revolutions that occurred in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria, which unfortunately we're still seeing the problems of that now, okay, were understood to be driven by Twitter and Facebook and people using these forms of communication to undercut government censorship. My early research in Croatia preceded that, and you saw it occurring there as well. There's social benefits, and I've given it quite a broad definition here. This allows people to access health and educational information never like we've seen before. We've never had the opportunity to go on sites like the Khan Academy and things like that, where you can download and you can just watch videos on things. So it opens up education in ways. Health education has been a massive improvement. There's been lots and lots of initiatives. And although we have problems with people self-diagnosing using Google, it has helped people. People are detecting the illnesses earlier using information they've gained from the internet. There's also a psychological perspective. There's the idea that the more connected we are, the more social we are. And there's been a lot of research that looks at how the sociability of a society is enhanced. The connections that people have with each other, are enhanced by the internet. They're able to look up people they met before. I've got friends with students who I taught 24 years ago in Thailand. So and they contacted me via Facebook and so on. So we're able to remain in contact with people. And finally, there's the creative potential. The ability to produce will lead to a flowering of creativity. People are now able to produce things and disseminate them. So we're able to produce texts, pictures, artworks, poetry, short stories, literature, and we're able to disseminate it to friends and family across the world, as well as to new fan communities. So the internet is seen as a tool for alleviating poverty and challenging forms of social inequality. And these advantages are, of course, denied to the very people who don't have it, though. And so this results in different dimensions to the digital divide, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight, the different way in which the digital divide operates. So the first one I want to talk about is the idea of access. So in the past 23 years, the percentage of the world's population who have access to the internet has risen from 0.04, which is about 16 million people, who are primarily scientists and academics in the US and Western Europe and other developed countries, to a figure now of 4.1 billion people, which is 54% of the world's population, are now online. And in developed countries, it's had a faster adoption rate than any communications technology in history. So if you go back and you have a look, landline, it took from 1904 to 1978 for landline in developed countries to reach 85% penetration, 85% of people in a country having landline. By the time we get to radio, starting in the mid-1920s, it takes 26 years to get to 85% potential. Television is a bit faster at 22 years. The internet took 12 years to go from very few users to 85% of people in developed countries able to having access to it. There's also significant efforts putting into driving this further. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 9 talks about achieving universal access. That is everybody in the whole world having access to the internet by 2030. We're quite a way off that yet, but it is one of the key drivers we're seeking to achieve. So that's kind of a quick chart of how it's gone. So we've gone from 0.00, let's say 4, 1995, various stages. Social media comes online about here, and we see a slight upturn until we get where we are today, up there. However, who has access is an interesting problem. So defined by the International Telecommunications Union, which is a branch of the United Nations, if someone has any internet access within a 30-day period of when they take the census, that's what we regard as having internet access. Okay? The current global figure, as I said, is 54.4, but that hides an enormous amount of variation. There's lots of different countries have lots of different rates. This chart over here is the well plotted. The darker the blue, the higher the level of access. It's a very crude chart. So you see large parts of the developing world in Africa, parts of Asia, have very minimal access to it. The UK has a 92% access rate. 92% of people in the UK above 16 years old have access to the internet. And Europe as a whole has an access rate of 85, with the US on 89. However, 70% of the world's users live in only 20 countries. So that's quite a steep, what we call a long tail. A lot of the people who are able to access the internet live in a minimal number of places. Poor little Eritrea has got 1.1% Eritreans down here, whereas North Korea is on 0.1. But that's because in North Korea, it's completely controlled by the state. So what I've done here is I've taken those United Nations International Telecommunications figures and I've plotted them onto the world. Now, if the magic goes right, we'll have this. So I've plotted them using Excel onto a graph, and we'll see if the magic of technology will work. Let's have a look. So, unfortunately, Excel is a bit of a crude piece of technology and doesn't have any sound. So on the word of 3, I want you all to say the word whoosh. Okay? So let's do a trial. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. Good. Let's have a go. Right. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. And then what we can do, we can zoom in and have a look at the access rates of individual countries. For some reason, the centre of the internet in the United Kingdom is up just south of Lancaster. I have no idea why. But where else can we look? We've got Ireland. It's just sort of in a little town called Rycourt. I don't know why. But was anyone here from a non-UK country? Jeremy. Let's have a look. Jeremy is one of our students from Hong Kong. So zoom out, and we'll zoom into Hong Kong. Yeah, please, whoosh as free as you want to. Okay, there's Hong Kong. There we go. Right, that's Macau, beg your pardon. There we are, Hong Kong, there. Hong Kong has 74%. Now, you may notice a column next to that. That's a particularly interesting column. That column is the number of people who've got a mobile phone in that country. For Hong Kong, it's a good that Jeremy spoke there, because the Hong Kong figure is 2.4. Now, what this means, that in many societies, people have more than one mobile phone. But it doesn't mean that those people all have access to the internet, because they usually got the mobile phone, but some people tend to have like 3 or 4 mobile phones in Hong Kong. Would you say that's a fair? Yeah, and you find this repeated around the world. I understand the reason is it because it takes advantage of different contracts. Would you say that's correct? Yeah, so you might get different rates on different contracts. So you buy 3 or 4 phones, your company might give you one, you have one at home, you've got one for evening, you've got one for international calls. So it uses it in different ways. So it's a lovely chart. I can let you have a play with it later on if you want to. Oh, I have to flick back, sorry. Done it? Yeah. Now, there is a sadly but unsurprising wealth to access relationship. It's not surprising at all, really. A very strong relationship between income and access. Globally speaking, the richer you are, the more likely you are to have access. It's not something we would question at all, really. And this is more evident, however, in poor countries than rich ones. So in the UK, where we have 92% access, the rich-poor thing doesn't make that much difference to whether you have internet access. It makes a bit of difference, as I'll talk about later, but not a major difference. In developing countries, it has a huge difference. The richer you are, the less likely you are to have internet access. And one of the big problems that the UN is working on is that access actually costs a lot more in developing countries than it does in developed countries. So I think I pay about 35 quid a month for the phone bill, for the broadband, and for various other bits and packages and the international phone calls. Many developing countries, that is magnitudes higher. And so, for example, in Laos, it costs 10 times the amount that it does cost in Singapore, which is a very developed country. So if you're going to be online in Laos, you're very wealthy. It's not just a middle living thing. You have to be exceptionally wealthy to get online in a number of developing countries. And there's also a positive correlation of national gross domestic product of a country and the extent of internet access. Okay? So the more money you've got as a country, not just individuals, but the money as a country, the more likely that country is likely to have a high level of access. But conversely, it's also the other way around. The higher the level of internet access, the wealthier the country. So we're not sure which way round it actually goes. Does being a rich country give you high internet access, or does having high internet access drive the economic wealth of your country? It could well be a third factor. Correlation does not mean causation, as we keep telling everyone. So there might be, both of these are high up there, but we don't know which one causes the other. Or it might be something independent to that we haven't factored into our analysis yet. Gender and access is a very important topic. What we tend to find is that the internet, in many ways, is another way in which women are disadvantaged in the world. In the same ways as access to primary healthcare, access to education, access to other systems of social betterment, we tend to find that women don't have as much access. Globally, women are on average 12.2% less likely to be able to access the internet. And in least developed countries, these are countries in the Horn of Africa and various parts of Asia, that rises to 31%. Women are 31% less likely to be able to get online than men. And despite the best efforts, the gap is actually growing. It's getting worse. It's not getting any better. It went from 12% in 2014 to 13% in 2015, and it's growing each year. And there's a lot of effort being put into trying to resolve this, but it isn't working. Now, that gap does narrow the more educated the woman is. And so if you educate women, you tend to find they are able to get online more. And it is also worse in rural areas. If you go outside of main cities, you find women are further disadvantaged there. Now, it's understood to be, literature reports a variety of reasons, possible existing structural and power relations within countries stop them doing it. So it's not necessarily the fault of the internet, per se, it's the power relations that already exist in various societies prevent women obtaining the education or obtaining access. So I've got a bit of a chart there. So you've got the world average is about 12, developed world, it's very low, it's only about 2.2%. It's still disgusting, it still should be absolute parity. In the developing world, we're up to, was it 16%, but in the least developed world, we're up over 30%. The rate of growth in internet access, how fast are we actually getting people online? It's changing, it's going the wrong way. It's actually going down. So the amount of increase that we're changing is actually decreasing slowly. So for the past 8 years, the figure has been gradually going down. For 2016, there was a bit of a pick-up in 2009, another pick-up in 2012, but since then, we've been gradually going down. Now, one of the reasons for this is we've got those low-lying fruit. We've actually reached communities that weren't online and could be accessed easily with a bit of spending on them. But now we're getting to the harder to reach communities, the people that aren't online, and it would take a lot more effort to get those people online. And so the investment actually has to get more per person online than it was before. So it gets more and more tricky the longer it goes on. Let's turn to within-country divides. What's happening in the UK? Well, overall, we've got 93% of the 16-plus UK population has access to the internet at least once every 30 days. However, other factors mitigate overall access rate. And in the UK, the most consequential factors for people in the UK are age, social economic group, and education. In other countries, other factors appear as more prominent. In the US, race becomes a major factor that distinguishes. But in the UK, we're a class-based society. That's what our main definition of how we position ourselves. So for us, social class is the main factor. So if you look at age, 16 to 24-year-olds, you're virtually there already. There's a few diehards still holding up, but for the most part, 16 to 24-year-olds are virtually online. As we get older and we get tireder, by the time we get to 75, unfortunately, it's dropped to 41%. Okay? In terms of socio-economic group, well, again, the AB1s, highly educated people in professional roles are 99. C1s, 97. There's a big drop down to C2s at 90%, but by the time we get to the DEs, we're down to 74%. Similarly, highest educated 99%, more educated 97%, less educated 84%. Now, of course, there is a correlation between these groups and this one. They are often the same people. These are the Daniel Blakes of the world. People that have worked in manual labour, get into the end of the working age thing, and tend not to be online. So there's a real hard-to-reach group of people. And it's particularly problematic with this older generation if we want to get them online, because education is hard to get to this group. It's not their fault, it's just more difficult to reach them with educational activities. Now, I want to talk about going a little bit beyond access, because that's great, we can give people the internet, but what else do you need to get there? Well, what we use to access makes a difference. So we might provide people with a way of getting online, but what we're actually giving them to get online makes a difference. So globally, 49.7% of access is now through mobile devices. In many countries, particularly in Central Africa, or sorry, not Central Africa, but in the parts of Africa, they've leapfrogged, they've ignored broadband and gone straight to mobile devices. That's how they get access in many countries. So phones and tablets. And they have a much higher percent of access than, I mean, if you look on here. So these are countries where they only use mobile devices to get on. In India, it's nearly 70% of people only use mobile devices to get online. Whereas the UK, we've got broadband. We've had it for longer. So it's the leapfrog, it's the changing of generations of how we can get people online. Let's jump in there. So in developed countries, mobile device, however, is predominant means of access for lower socio-economic groups. So a lot of lower socio-economic groups do not have access to a computer. They will have mobile devices to get online. This presents a wealth of problems because there's certain things you can't do with a tablet or mobile phone. Tablets and mobile phones are designed as devices of consumption and not production. Try writing a long story or an extended piece of text on a mobile phone. It's incredibly irritating, as I'm sure you'll all go for that. Try doing something, editing something graphically on a tablet. It's just not as good as doing it with a mouse and computer. I don't know if anyone finds this when you actually try to do this. But to actually produce things on a tablet is difficult. You can do a bit of video editing, but if you really want to do video editing, you need a computer to do that. Okay? So having these things as your main way of access suddenly cuts you off from a lot of activity that you could do on the internet. So tablets are good for reading, watching and searching. They're not good for lengthy typing, image manipulation, editing or creating. It's something I'll come back to shortly. Problems beyond access, number 2. Technology alone is not enough. I'm going to introduce you to something called the one laptop per child. So the one laptop per child is a lovely project. It was instigated by a person called Nicholas Negroponte at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I've got one of them here. My kids have seen this before. This is a one laptop per child. It was a computer produced specifically for the developing world. And what you do, you flip up these little bits here. These are Wi-Fi antenna. You put it up, and you've got a laptop. This was developed in 2007. And it was devolved across the developing world. This one doesn't work anymore, the battery's gone on it. But you have a nice little computer there, you've got a touch screen there. The sexiest bit of all is, watch this. Look at that. It's a games pad as well. Isn't that nice? So it's a lovely thing. This was the first netbook. And after this, a number of manufacturers started investing in these things and producing them. But anyway, so these wonderful things were produced for the cost of $100. And the idea was they would be given out to children in the developing world who would suddenly have access to this. And their natural inquisitiveness would allow them to use this device. It wasn't loaded with Windows, it was loaded with an operating system called Sugar, which was developed specifically for the device based on a Linux build, if anyone's interested. Actually, what I was going to do, I was going to pass it around. If anyone wants to have a play with it, you can have a little... have a look and pass it on. Okay. So it was £100, it was tough, powerful, it had an external manual charger. So the criticism were these developing villages and the countries don't have electricity. It doesn't matter, you've got a wind-up charger you could power it with, give it anywhere. They could use a mobile phone, one mobile phone per village would provide broadband to everything in there. It was great. It was paid for by governments in developing countries using their educational budgets. Okay, and it was sent out. And there's a few gifts. They operated a give one, get one scheme. So if you gifted a laptop to the developing country, you got one yourself. And that's how this one came onto the open market via eBay. 3 million of these were eventually shipped to Uruguay, Peru, Rwanda, Argentina, Haiti, Mexico, Nicaragua, and a number of other countries. And it was a wondrous thing. However, in less than 1 year, the usage rate was below 20%. In all the audits we did of this device, we went into schools, great, where are they? Oh, they're under the covers in the corner. So giving them to schools wasn't enough. Now, there's a whole legion of problems behind this, one of which was, well, we've already got a curricula, and now you're giving us laptops that have nothing to do with how we'd learn. It was dumped in there, given to them. The second major problem is the teachers didn't know how to use them. The children didn't know what to do with them. Because children in the Western countries, where the kind of activities that people perform on laptops are normal. But in many developing countries, they have entirely different cultural systems for classroom practice. Simply putting a laptop in there is disruptive. It causes problems. Teachers don't like it. Teachers weren't trained how to use them properly. So in numerous instances, the provision remains unused due to the users not being trained or not seeing the value of it. Now, there is evidence that the better educated people were able to use them. But the trouble is, the better educated people weren't the ones who wanted to use it. They didn't need it as much as the ones who weren't educated. So the ones that needed the laptops the most were the ones that needed the training the most. And from late 2000, emphasis began to focus then upon training. So we end up with this kind of the second dimension now, which is what we term education and technical skills. And it's the umbrella term is digital literacy, which we tend to use for defining this. And it's to be able to use digital technology and the internet. Lots of effort to meet this with teacher upskilling in the UK and short courses for new users in libraries, schools, colleges, to accompany technological initiatives. So now broadband is out there, but we're training people to use it. And we're getting them there. Now, interestingly, the government doesn't do a lot of this training, but private companies do. Barclays have their Digital Eagle scheme. Google have a digital garage scheme where we offer training on this. Even Accenture got in on the act of offering education, basic IT skills for people. And I'd say there's with a degree of cynicism, maybe its digital customers are slightly cheaper to reach than pen and paper-based customers for banks and so on. So they want us to go online because it's cheaper for them to do it. So the second dimension is this education rank. The third dimension, how am I doing for time? Nearly there. Am I doing for time? Yeah. The third dimension is participation and creation. And most recently, attention has focused on what people do online once they're actually there. So we've trained them up, we've given them IT, and they get online. What are they doing once they get online? And there's different levels of engagement with different digital media. And we need to kind of make a distinction between consuming, participating, and creating digital content. Content includes images, films, video, music, sound, graphic and objects. Now, when I asked that question earlier, how many of you create and upload, large numbers of you put your hand up. That is very, very unusual. If you look at stats for YouTube, well, 100% of people watch YouTube, of course, otherwise they wouldn't have an account. About 64, 65% bother to click a like on videos. Sharing it gets down to about 54%. Commenting, bothering to add something on there to it, drops even lower. But actually uploading new content, starting a channel, putting things on there, and I don't just mean YouTube, but I mean all sorts of different platforms, the number drops right down to below 1% for people actually actively constructing content to put online. So virtually everyone searches for information. Many participate and communicate, but far fewer people actually create and bother to disseminate their content. If you look at this division, creating and partaking, look at it globally, you get some quite stark figures. There are almost 5 times as much content, by that I mean blogs, videos, images, films, and web pages, are produced by people in wealthy OECD countries than by the rest of the world combined. Okay, so it's 5 times the amount of content is produced by wealthy countries than by less developed countries. The reasons for this are manifold, one of which, the main one, is institutional. Companies don't tend to base themselves in developing countries. The talent might be there, but they keep away from them. There is a movement to do parts of your labour in Africa and in India, and parts of it like that, but the money flows back to the developing countries, of course. Secondly, skill levels. It takes high-level skills to produce high-level media content. And if the skill level in your country is not up there, you just don't produce it. Finally, the platform usage. Now, this comes back to that point I made a few minutes ago when I talked about what we're using to get online. And if you're using mobile devices to get online, predominantly in the developing world it's mobile devices, there's far less opportunity to produce things using mobile devices. And so it has an effect on the amount they're able to produce. Within country participation divides as well. So for those with access and technical skills, there are further issues. In the UK and US, educational levels and socio-economic group relate to what people do online. Play a major part in that. In the UK, better educated A, B, and C1 socio-economic groups are dominant. They tend to use social media for personal branding, for advancing their own personal status. When you look at what people from lower socioeconomic groups use for social media, sociability, retaining and maintaining friendships, retaining and maintaining contact with other people tends to be the dominant use of them. So content and creation is done for entertainment purposes. So let me just ask the academics in the room here, and people in this. Who uses these two? How many? 1, 2, 3, quite a few. So this is academia.edu. It's a way in which we disseminate content and ResearchGate. How many people use LinkedIn? Yeah. These are personal branding pieces of software, ways in which we can extend our personal brand for professional reasons online. Okay? And it's a slightly different socioeconomic group, uses different media for this. Okay, so I'm going to start drawing it to a close there. So what I've looked at is the kind of ways in which the digital divide has impacted upon us. And what we really need to do is ask what to make of the digital divide 23 years on. Okay, there was me. So what's changed in the past 23 years? Well, I might have put on a little bit of weight. Maybe I don't look like the serial killer that Neil insists I look like on pictures anymore. So what's changed from those early years when we thought the internet could save all to where we are now? We didn't have fake news back then. We didn't have cyberbullying. We didn't have all those other horrible things that we get today. But we have other advantages as well. But we now realise that addressing the digital divide is more complex than simply providing access. You need to go a little bit further than just providing content, a way in for people. People must have the skills to do it. And even then, even when they've got the skills, and even when you've provided the access, it's still not a level playing field. You see differentials between different social groups. And the digital divide was initially understood as a barrier to alleviating poverty. We now understand that poverty is a lot more complex and can't be fixed by a solution that comes out of a box and is dumped on people. Indeed, despite our best hopes, the internet may well be another space in which the social stratification actually occurs. It may not be a tool to alleviate it, but we just may be making a new space where it can actually happen. We're finding new ways in which social stratification is facilitated and even possibly accelerated. Thank you very much.
Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really, really glad I understood that, Marcus. I saw your title when I was coming in and I was a little bit terrified. But it was a fascinating lecture and I'm really honoured to be able to give the vote of thanks this evening. I want to get the words right. Normally I speak without notes, but this, I'm very touched that Marcus asked me to give the vote of thanks, and so I'm going to read what I have to say. The Vice-Chancellor has alluded to the fact that Marcus was made a National Teaching Fellow this year, and so I just thought I'd share with you a little bit of that journey because I was lucky enough to be able to work with him on preparing that application. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the National Teaching Fellowship Award is a very prestigious accolade within the HE sector in the UK, and it's achieved through a competitive process. Writing the application, gathering evidence, and getting together the promotional material can be agonising, especially if you're modest, like Marcus. And as a fellow NTF, I learned the hard way, as did he, that in order to be able to be in with a chance, you have to be prepared to tell your story and blow your own trumpet. Now, trumpet blowing is something that comes very hard to Marcus. He has a vast amount of expertise and innumerable qualities that he could toot about. But being modest, he found this tremendously uncomfortable. He would regularly appear in my doorway looking mortified at the prospect of having to be seen to boast about his achievements. A lot of groaning went on, as Sive will testify. He would say, "Don't make me say that." And he'd just go, "Oh," and I go, "No, shush, you just have to do it this way." And part of his distaste for the hoo-ha is because he is driven by something infinitely more important than personal gong gathering. In his own words, he wants his teaching to be something that develops students' capabilities and helps them become a person they value. He's also driven, as we've heard, by the desire to ensure that neurodiverse students, specifically those with dyslexia and dyspraxia, have access to learning opportunities which allow them to use, engage, and create with media that use different senses. He designs his teaching practice to make this happen. Now, he'll shoot me if I read great chunks of his National Teaching Fellow application, so I won't do that, just a little bit. But I think it's important. You've already seen in the Vice-Chancellor's opening words and in Marcus's talk himself, just how impressive the scale and the scope of the work he does in the field of media is, and how far-reaching his influence is as well. And I want to share with you a couple of things that students have said about him which illustrate the impact he has as an educator. 1. I've no doubt it's because of him that I achieved over and above what I believed myself to be capable of. 2. I now teach critical theory at blah blah university and employ your techniques to get these fundamentally important points across. Thank you for helping to change the course of my life. Waiting for the outcome of an NTF application is a long process, which only becomes more nerve-wracking as you reach the day when the announcements are made and you watch the clock and your emails to see whether or not you are one of the chosen. It is completely typical of Marcus that when he got confirmation of his success, he sent me an email with just one word in it. It just said, well. Marcus, it's a privilege to work with you, to learn from you, and for our students to have you teach them. May I, on behalf of us all, thank you very much.